Hello, welcome everyone. I'm hoping everyone's hearing me now and seeing me. Welcome to Soil Health Data, Opportunities for Strengthening Farm Policy and Programs. We have an excellent panel today, and I luckily am just going to introduce them and they're going to take it from there, and then we'll hopefully have some time for questions. The panel today is 4 wonderful and amazing people. Aria McLauchlan is the co-founder and executive director of LandCorps, a nonprofit organization advancing soil health policies and programs that create value for farmers, businesses, and communities. In her role, Aria guided the successful passage of language in both the House and Senate in 2019, supporting soil health at the USDA, and built a broad coalition to help secure over $50 million in federal investment in soil health in the 2018 Farm Bill. Aria previously spent a decade working in business development and branding and marketing. She lives in Grass Valley in Northern California and is a proud dual citizen of the United States and Australia, where she grew up. We also have Dr. Bianca Moebius-Clune, is the director of the USDA NRCS Health Division. She has led the development of the division staff of regional and national specialists who provide leadership on agency strategy, policy, tools, training, direct assistance, science and technology integration, and soil health efforts across the country. Bianca came to NRC in 2014 from Cornell University, where she served on the faculty as a senior extension associate and lecturer. Dr. Dorn Cox serves as research director and project lead for Open Team, Open Technology Ecosystem for Agricultural Management at Wolf's Neck Center for Agriculture and the Environment. Dorn also manages his diversified family farm with his wife, Sarah, in New Hampshire. As co-founder of the Farm OS software platform, The GOAT, Gathering for Open Ag Tech and Farm Hack Community, and founding board member of the New England Farmers Union, he is passionate about sharing open source agricultural tools that can accelerate innovation and quantify environmental services from regenerative agriculture. In 2018, Dorn was awarded the Food Shot Global Ground Breaker Prize. He has a PhD from the University of New Hampshire in Natural Resources and Earth System Science. Arohi Sharma is a policy analyst with the Natural Resources Defense Council. Arohi advocates for policies that protect and restore rivers in California and promote regenerative agricultural practices to build soil health. Before joining NRDCS, Arohi was in graduate school, where she researched ways to incentivize multi-stakeholder partnerships to combat climate change, and worked with the Ethiopian government to help craft the nation's first sustainable agricultural development strategy. Arohi received her master's degree from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government and has served as legislative staffer on Capitol Hill for the U.S. Senate Ag Committee and Senator Cory Booker. Thank you all, and take it away.
Great, thanks for all of those introductions, Jeff. Really appreciate it. I know it was a mouthful. So hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. Like Jeff mentioned, my name is Arohi Sharma. I work for the Natural Resources Defense Council, and I will be moderating today's discussion. Before we get into setting the stage and having a conversation over some questions, I wanted to mention some housekeeping items. If you have questions, and of course, I hear that the Q&A portions of the NCAT conference have been very robust. So if you have questions, please pop them into the chat box, into the chat function on Zoom. The second, there will be a QR code that pops up during the last few minutes of our panel. And this is for the Certified Crop Advisor CEU. So stay tuned for that, or don't be alarmed in case you see that thing pop up. The last thing is, please rate all of the sessions that you attend for the conference, so yesterday and today, and you can do all of that on Whova. Okay, so let me take the next couple of minutes to set the stage for this conversation. I think it's very safe to say that we're all feeling a new momentum around soil health programming and policy at the local, at the state, and at the federal level, from local initiatives that help divert food waste to composting services, to state level soil health programs, bills that help establish soil health task forces like the one that was recently introduced in Montana, or create soil health programs like the one that was introduced in Colorado, to federal initiatives that allocate more money for existing conservation programs. Public policy is seizing this opportunity to scale up soil health and soil building practices across the country. Meanwhile, the private sector is also joining the conversation, creating ag tech to help farmers and ranchers glean more data from their fields to other market opportunities. Unfortunately, soil health data are often siloed through this process. And there's currently very limited cooperation between public sector and private sector efforts. And all of that lack of coordination ends up burdening farmers and ranchers with the arduous role of having to collect and report different kinds of data on different kinds of platforms. It ends up being so much of a burden that from the conversations that I've had with farmers and ranchers, it ends up disincentivizing participation in soil health initiatives, which is the opposite of what we want to see happen. We're all agricultural stakeholders on this call, and we all have a role to play in making sure that soil health data are more comprehensive, more accessible, and more meaningful, so that recommendations for policy efforts at the local, state, and federal level, so that efforts in the private sector are informed by the best science. So, knowing all of that, what can we do to improve coordination so that farmers and ranchers are empowered to participate in soil health initiatives? Panelists, I'm going to toss a question over to you first individually. And while answering that question, please feel free to talk more about your work and this general question of how can we empower folks to participate in soil health initiatives. So Aria, I'm going to start with you. What are federal and state policy opportunities that can help strengthen soil health data collection?
Oh, pardon me. I think, hello, folks. We've got a little house phone ringing here, but it's a pleasure to be with you all. And let me see. So our organization, LandCorp, is a 501c3 organization, as Jeff mentioned, and our work is focused on advancing the missing infrastructure and economic incentives that will allow soil health to be adopted at scale here in the United States. And we take a practical and nonpartisan approach to strengthening our public infrastructure. We talk about emphasizing voluntary and market-based incentives and even minimizing unnecessary regulation, particularly for producers. And we've built broad bipartisan support, including for the soil health demonstration trials in the 2018 Farm Bill, which I believe Bianca will talk a little bit more about, and worked closely on the implementation of that to ensure not only the $50 million was allocated to that program, but also to ensure consistent soil health assessment protocols were used to assess the projects and that program overall. Now, one major opportunity, not only in federal policy, but I think also in for the private sector, is this idea of risk mitigation. Of course, we're collectively having a moment that's thinking about soil carbon and carbon markets as a mean to reward soil health practices, but we do need to acknowledge that these schemes are pay for performance in nature, so they occur after the farmer has done the work, and that inherently means that we're asking farmers to pay for their transition to regenerative agriculture. Now, in contrast, we at LandCorp have identified the risk mitigation value of soil health practices, these practices making producers more resilient to flood and drought, which is something I think that we inherently understand, but haven't fully incorporated yet into our policy making and into all of our institutions. And specifically the institutions that price risk, our public and private agricultural lenders and insurers, they don't yet have a way to assess and price risk through the lens of soil health. So LandCorp is also working on a private sector modeling initiative to quantify the risk mitigation benefits of soil health practices as a tool for lenders and insurers, so that they can start to offer products that incentivize practice adoption. And we're also very interested in working together, I think, with all of the folks on this call, all stakeholders across the spectrum, to work together to compile an airtight case with the data that we have, whether we're running a technology company or working on farm or with wonderful sort of collaborative state level initiatives, using that data to reform federal crop insurance and USDA lending to help those to help those programs acknowledge and incentivize soil health practices. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Great, thanks, Aria. I like the focus on proactive efforts.
Indeed.
Yeah, Bianca, punching it off to you. Can you share more about the work that you did to establish and use baseline soil health data monitoring and verification protocols for the soil health demonstration trial, and maybe provide a few sentences of context about what the soil health demonstration trial is?
Sure thing, yeah. And sort of at a broader scope, I want to say, at USDA, we've been working diligently on Farm Bill, both required and inspired development and flexibilities. Data cohesion, data interoperability is big on the radar, authoritative data standards, setting those, and above all, really easier customer-friendly public accessibility of USDA data has been very important to USDA, and so we're all working on that. I'm very happy to be one member of the large team of folks that are all contributing toward that. Soil health has been an agency priority for NRCS since 2012, and so in a way we did a lot of legwork before this last Farm Bill came along, so that meant that we were in a great place to really get the soil health demonstration trials going when that came through. We've been working nationally across headquarters units, across state leaderships, across our cohesive strategies to integrate soil health functionality into the agency's conservation planning processes, that then result in updated information technology applications, conservation planning procedures, conservation practice standards, tools, databases, and more. So, and that's very much a cross-partners effort. We always get input on that. Of course, with the recent executive order on tackling climate crisis at home and abroad that President Biden signed into place, the department will be working to leverage these soil health efforts further to encourage voluntary adoption of climate-smart agricultural practices. And we all know, of course, that soil health management systems are a big piece of that, amongst various other approaches. We can very much show measurable, verifiable carbon sequestration benefits. And then, of course, we all talk about resilience. So with all that in the background, when the 2018 Farm Bill called for the creation of the soil health demonstration trials, they became part of the Conservation Innovation Grant Program, which has been in place for a long time. So we'd already been putting forth grants for those. But what's different about these trials that we implemented here is that we are now able to actually ask for a national minimum data set that all of these projects contribute. So on a large scale, there's similarity with the former conservation innovation grants. We're looking for innovation. We're looking for things that can be applied on the ground. But these trials really incentivize improved soil health, increased soil carbon levels on actual working farms. They're currently funded at about 10 million per year going toward this, and that's been very exciting. So we've got 2 years of projects on the ground right now, and we're going to be integrating all of the cool stuff that comes out of these projects. So each project is unique, right? Each project has a number of trials out there with farmers, but what's now different is that we have this minimum data set that we established. I'll discuss that a bit more in a moment. But basically all of these projects collect information that is then compiled across all of the collaborating producers, not just on each project that we can learn from, but compiling nationally what everybody is doing out there into a data set that can then be analyzed. So we have national level consistency in what we're collecting, but we have that regional applicability of what producers are actually putting on the ground, what production systems, what soils they're working in, what gaps they're addressing in terms of what their production systems are having issues with that need to be figured out. The minimum data set that we've put in place includes taking background data on, of course, soil type, what the production system is, how that system is being managed, the economics of that, yields that are being achieved by these producers. And also we've put in place both field and laboratory soil health status assessments that really kind of get at soil functioning. So we have 2 technical notes out there. We have 450.03 that recommends laboratory methods. That technical note was compiled across many in the scientific community that have worked on soil health assessments, and is kind of a first step to the current best available methods. So it's actually got standardized procedures that we now use as an agency for soil health demonstration trials and a number of other things. We have a second technical note for 5006, and that's our in-field assessment that our planners use to identify what the resource concerns are, the soil health resource concerns, when they go out and do conservation planning and provide technical and financial assistance to the producers we work with. So both of those sets of methods are incorporated in this data set. And then we collect outcomes information, for example, water quality, water quantity, pest resilience, and those kinds of things. So it's really exciting to be compiling this national data set across all of these diverse regional projects. So I'll leave it at that and keep the rest of it going.
Sounds like you don't have a lot to do over there at NRCS, Bianca.
No, we sit there on a board now. It's been really exciting to work on all that.
I bet. So Dorn, next question over to you. How are data collection, monitoring, and reporting efforts mapped out among the member organizations in your company? And feel free to give a little overview of what your company does.
Thanks so much. It's really great to be here and share this panel because I really wanted to sort of echo the excitement that we have within Open Team around the momentum that's really building as more organizations and the general public starts to come to grip with the asset that we have, this regenerative asset of soil health and the implications, because we're now really looking at more than just food, fiber, and energy from agriculture and all the rest of what we're looking at in terms of the benefits from soil health, from climate mitigation and adaptation in terms of floods and droughts, and but also habitat and wildfire and human health all come into this. And it requires a new kind of public consciousness and a public science and a systems science that's multi-generational and urgent, from the microbiome to the biosphere. And that's really exciting from our perspective, and that's why Open Team exists. So, we aren't, Wolf's Neck Center is an educational and agricultural nonprofit, but Open Team is really a collaborative to bring that public science together and recognize that in order to address these large-scale systemic challenges and opportunities will require a different kind of platform for collaboration. So I'll quickly go through sort of the acronym itself is Open Technology Ecosystem for Agricultural Management. Open because it's large scale and needs to be trusted. Technology ecosystem because we have amazing tools and technologies to measure at lower cost with higher confidence than we've ever had. But in order to be trusted, we need to build communities around them. They need to be put into context. And none of this science is any good if it isn't translatable into management at every scale across landscapes and production systems and cultures. So really that's what we're facing is a large scale applied science project. And that's where adaptive management and soil health comes into play. And so from our perspective, we're a collaborative of more than 30 organizations, including research universities and partnerships with government agencies and ag tech companies and farmer organizations and agroecosystem marketplaces and more. And again, to start to be able to bridge the confidence from our measurement at the field scale or even microbiome level up to remote sensing and sort of sense making as we look at the landscape level from making a field level decision to global climate accounting. And so that's been really the core of our work, and we really see it as three tiers in our working groups. That the data that we need to make better decisions at that field level, that agronomic data comes from an adaptive management process, a high quality soil health management planning process. That actually generates baseline recommendations, which is the same data that we need to drive our marketplace claims, and it's the same data that we need for research. And it's the same data that we're asking essentially to make this invisible visible across these different scales, even though we've all these different uses. So I'll talk more about sort of the idea that if we can support that planning process and use that as a learning effort. So we get a feedback. It's not about practices or outcomes. It's actually about validation and learning through this adaptive process. And we have a lot of the structures right now on the books to help support that. So that's, again, part of what I think after decades of work with folks who are leading up to this, I think now is an exciting time to start pulling those together. And so, I mean, I think fundamentally we're at a point where a lot of the tools are in place, but we need to translate them into create data-driven, site-specific recommendations that are accessible for all producers. And we can certainly, I'm excited to dive into what that actually, what that looks like, both in terms of enhancing some of the existing efforts, but also what I think is possible by, again, bridging the same data, whether it's public or private, together to help drive change on the ground.
Great. Yeah, I'm right there with you. And I like what you said about feedback loops and making sure that the data that are collected at the farm level, whatever management decisions come out of that, whatever policy can be informed from that data, whatever those the outcomes are, that the information is then being fed back to the farmer or the rancher that's participating in these programs. Aria, can you speak a little bit more about the opportunities for federal and state policy to help glean some of the lessons that Bianca mentioned, that Dorn mentioned, that you've mentioned, in proactive risk mitigation? Can you help set that stage?
Sure, I'll do my best. I mean, I think that what the work that Dorn is doing is so remarkable and proactive, because it is kind of threading the needle and showing a way that all of these different stakeholder groups can participate. But I particularly want to shout out again the work that Bianca is doing and that NRCS and USDA have been thinking about for some time, because I think it's such a remarkable baseline and springboard to work from. Not only are we setting the stage for a consistent kind of national baseline, but that then allows us to do so much more. I think it can inform the private sector initiatives that are really starting to spring up, and meaning that those folks don't have to start from scratch when starting to put together some of these carbon or ecosystem service markets, for example. It's also just an incredibly important baseline to improve and catalyze our research. Without a consistent, like minimum viable set of indicators that we're testing, as well as a consistent protocol for sampling in field, and then also lab calibration, making sure we get those apples to apples data. It will be considerably harder to compare one study to another. So just having getting a little bit more of those studies talking to one another using that consistent soil health assessment protocol, I think, is really important. And then of course there's also the sort of plethora of state level policies and programs that are passing. It feels like there's an update on an almost weekly basis regarding those soil health state level policies. And so again, yes, there needs to be regional variability and adaptation and consideration for what works in that state and those regions. But having that national baseline really is helpful. So that's something that I'd like to point out. And then I think as we're also advocating for more research and improvement in and funding for soil health monitoring on the ground, we should also be considering that remote sensing and modeling and research and development more broadly are also areas that are just increasing exponentially. And I think it will be important to consider how we incorporate things like satellite monitoring into the workings of some of these federal programs, so that we can have a more efficient, effective, inexpensive program that works for producers. And then, of course, keeping things like privacy and data access in mind, which might be another topic for us.
I know that privacy is a huge issue, so hopefully we'll get to that question. But I see the chat box flaring up, so that's good that the folks are interested in this conversation. Bianca, question for you, or if other folks want to pivot off of this or build off of Bianca's response to this question, feel free to. You mentioned a lot about the data collection, monitoring, verification efforts that NRCS is doing. Are there plans within USDA to expand these baseline soil health assessment protocols beyond CIG and help incorporate them into other programs and activities within NRCS?
That's a great question, and actually that's already happening. So we don't just only have it in soil health demonstration trials, we actually have a number of our classic CIGs that use these. Beyond that, we are including it in the environmental benefits calculations that we're beginning to develop for conservation planners to use with private landowners. We are pulling this into our dynamic soil property studies that are going on across the country and the science of soil health studies that really incorporate this work into our soil survey. So we are working very closely with the soil survey side of NRCS. And we have been sort of building that into a number of databases that we have in process. For example, we're currently building the Farm Bill mandated conservation practice database, but that will be closely linked to our dynamic soil properties hub that will connect to all of soil survey. And in short, what that means is we will have an interpretation feature eventually in our toolbox, where anybody who has a measured value that's done with the methods that we have the background information for can go in, provide that measured value, and get a translation that is appropriate for that soil type, that climate, that production system. We are currently collaborating with ARS on that. You may have heard Kristen Wiem speak. I wasn't able to catch her talk, but I think that she spoke about the SHAPE, or Soil Health Assessment Protocol and Evaluation, that we're currently building, and that should become available, I think, this year to our planners and probably to the public. It will be built into the conservation practice database. And the great thing about that work is that it's a continuously iterative piece of work, right? So we have a certain number of methods that are currently part of that we're collecting. But as soil health demonstration trials and all these other studies, any partner who shares data, as all that work moves forward, as people test new indicators and new methods, they can be compared to that national data set that we will then already have, and it'll make it much easier to insert new methods and develop the regressions between those new methods, and therefore come up with fairly relevant interpretations. So as part of our soil interpretations that we have as an agency, there will then be soil health specific, the management side of how we influence soil health, that will actually become available in our tools in the very near future. So really excited that that's happening. And I would like to say, that's really a not just cross-agency, but cross-partner effort. A number of folks who are probably on the line have been involved in that. A lot of projects that have been funded by NRCS and by other partners. NIFA has had these methods in some of their RFPs. We have a conservation activity plan now, a CAP, that's soil health management. So our technical service providers will, as of last year and this year, we're really getting going. We'll be able to do soil health management planning, and this is part of that. We can now provide financial assistance for soil health testing through our conservation activity 216. So things are really moving up. It's getting incorporated in a lot of ways. So that's really exciting.
My goodness. Again, not busy enough, are you? Dorn, I'm wondering, what Bianca just shared seems like the gap that you were mentioning during your introductory remarks, trying to get some of that interpretation, those management decisions back to the farmer or rancher. Any reflections from Bianca's answer?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, I think that's exactly right, and I'm just so encouraged and excited by the steps that I've seen USDA and NRCS make towards making data more available back to producers. And I think that's the real opportunity here that we're starting to see some movement towards, both in the form of USDA-led tools, but increasingly with sort of the vision around farmers.gov, the ability to start to use that data that's collected by technical service providers or field staff, or ultimately with conservation districts, for other on-farm management purposes. And I think that's the exciting thing. And part of the core vision of Open Team is really that from the producer level, we should be able to enter data once and use it many times. And that data is valuable at the farm level, and it's important to build trust. And so part of what we're working on within Open Team is actually a structure where the questions that are asked at the field level, say for public programs, can actually be mirrored and ownership retained at the farm level, on top of which other decision tools like cover crop tools or nutrient management plans that are generated external to USDA can be built on that. Because there's actually, in that, say the conservation activity ranking tool, there's a lot of detailed data that's collected as part of the ranking process that has other uses. And so I think there's a huge opportunity there to bridge, again, our public investment in the field staff that's out there collecting and observing and helping to plan and create conservation activity plans, and then build on top of that. And so there are examples like the Zero Food Print Initiative that's developing funds for conservation based on upcharges in restaurants around the country to essentially use the same evaluation process, but then augment public funding for those similar practices as sort of a limited set of practice codes. But again, leveraging a lot of the same infrastructure there and expanding, but it really requires that data interoperability and for producers to be in control of that data to accelerate that process. And so we see the opportunity here again to create something like an ag data wallet that goes with a producer that allows them to, again, control their data, to build trust, and then interact with different marketplaces, both public and private, that are providing both technical services, but also access to premium markets based on production practices and outcomes, as well as the environmental service market. So I think it's key to stacking here, and the role that as a standards bearer and as a stable organization in terms of setting some of those standards and data structures, I think the USDA is a really important role to play in that. And a lot of these practices that Bianca mentioned, the dynamic soils database and the soil health methods and in-field assessments are also very important in sort of launching that. And again, I think that helps provide the foundation with, as we create this pre-competitive, again, this is, we're in it together. So to the extent that we can leverage some of those that sort of utility function, and organizations like FAR, who are really organized around, that provides matching funding for Open Team, are there to help provide this pre-competitive space on which we can move forward. So.
Great, thanks, Dorn. The chat situation is lighting up, so I'm going to see if I can pull some of the questions that folks are asking. We'll move on to that for the next 7 or 8 minutes or so. Let's see, one of our participants asked, Brian asked, how would someone find out where the regional, quote unquote, regional hotspots are for soil health adoption or regenerative agriculture, or areas that are early adopters in the carbon marketplace? Can we use, that soil health and location data to help figure out what some of these regional hotspots are? And this is a question for anyone.
Well, I'll jump in and just say, part of, as I mentioned, the importance of actually making these systems work is that they need to be applied. And that's a very intensely local process. And so our approach has been try to find organizations, agricultural organizations that have a strong network working on soil health initiatives, and bridge them both together, but also support their efforts and linking. So examples, our approach there has been to link, say, soil health partnership in the Midwest and row crop production with, say, PASA in Pennsylvania, or Kivera and rangeland monitoring, Point Blue and their network in California, and start to bridge those conversations, because each of them, again, represents and has trust in their local agricultural system, and yet a lot of what we're doing is the same. And so that's a big part of our effort is again, to identify those hubs of activity and then start to link them together, and both from a relational perspective, but also be able to use the same tech so that we can compare results and validate our approaches. So maybe our management structure is different, but the underlying sort of ways we measure soil health and success is actually going to be the same.
Must be music to your ears, Aria.
That's really,
Go ahead, Bianca.
yeah, just that's really exciting work, Dorn. And I think, yeah, working across all of these organizations is so critically important. And I think that right now there's not one place where somebody might go to find where those really hot spots are in soil health management. But with all of these different organizations working on it, I think a number of organizations have information on their website with case studies of producers. For example, we've got a start of some economic case studies where producers really kind of share what the economics are. A number of other organizations are doing work like that. Soil Health Institute just posted something earlier today. Soil Health Partnership is working on this. Dorn, you're working on that. We have an MOU with you so that we can make sure our databases eventually are able to talk to each other and those kinds of things. Our agency has a conversation on soil health that is a monthly series. We're putting these conversations on our agency YouTube channel, so you can find out about particular successes that are happening at the local level from folks who speak on that series. We've got various soil health champions that NACD has posted. Our agency has soil health success stories out there. I think there's a lot of success stories out there. But that question really kind of makes me think, wow, how could we work together as organizations to put all that in one place so that somebody who says, gosh, I'd really like to know what's successful here in this location, in my county, in my state, how do I find out about that? And I think that's part of what we're trying to do with the conservation practice database, to allow somebody to drill down and say, okay, in my location, what are the successful practices and who might I be able to tap into from these projects that we've had? I think there's more potential to be explored there.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I'll just reinforce that I think one of the key things here, because this is about not just about the data, but it's about the conversation around the data. This is part of the core of soil health and planning, is that it requires peer-to-peer conversations to really get at and localize this incredible amount of knowledge. And so I think it's been part of the NACD Soil Health Champion conversation to begin to build not just the database, but the social platform for those conversations. And that's something that we're actively, having to build through Open Team as well, just to connect our hubs and networks. But I think that's again an opportunity for linking with some of the existing networks that Bianca just mentioned.
Brilliant. And if I can just add to that as well, I think in addition to these success stories and sort of case level, the case studies showing the economics, what I'm really excited about, and this is part of Lancor's work that I was referencing, is being able to aggregate some of the conservation practice data from satellite imagery and layer that on with yield estimates and so on, so that we can really start to tell a bigger story and bring lenders and insurers into the conversation. Because I think who is interested in this data and how is it relevant to them is part of the conversation about how we take this, I think, just squarely out of agriculture and farmers and into the broader finance sector. So there's really an opportunity there to use that technology and use big data, not in a scary way, but really just to create much more practical, meaningful economic incentives for our producers.
Great. And I'm seeing some questions pop up about how do we get there? So how do we translate these needs that we're seeing emerge because of these varied organizational approaches, both public sector and private sector, for soil health data collection and monitoring and verification? How do we get from what we're doing now, these disaggregated efforts, to where we need to go, potentially, a one-stop shop or a little database where you can, if your data qualifies you for participation in one program, you're able to then qualify for another multi-stakeholder partnership or another public sector or private sector effort. And this is paralleling a question asked by Ryan White. So how do we get there?
Well, there are certainly, I'll say quickly, Dorn, some legislative opportunities, some bills introduced in the previous Congress that I think we can expect to see come around again, like the Agricultural Resilience Act or the Conservation Driven Outcomes Act, which is bipartisan. Senator Wyden and Senator Booker both have bills that would expand the soil health demonstration trials. So there are a few different pieces of legislation that bolster the funding and infrastructure and research around soil health outcomes and data. And then I think, of course, the work that the Agree Coalition around the Agriculture Data Act, expanding that. And I want to explain what about that we think is particularly interesting and important is the access to not just county level aggregated data, but field level data that we can start to use to demonstrate that these conservation practices do and have risk mitigating benefits or economic benefits, and that will allow us to cascade out. And that's been one of those barriers. So that's how I would see that being addressed from a legislative perspective.
Yeah, I'd like to reinforce that. I mean, I think the Ag Data Act was particularly is important, but can be expanded substantially in terms of not, again, as I mentioned, the concept of an Ag Data wallet that provides assurance in terms of how producers' data is used and really oriented rather than around the agency, around utility at the producer level. And I guess I would, add that technologically, the Ag Data Use Agreement standards in terms of ontology terms and questions are also important. And I think also there's emerging, as we have this proliferation of markets for some sort of function, I don't know, just in the last few weeks, where it seems like each week there's a new ecosystem service market that's being announced. And so part of the conversation has also been that there's a need for a clearinghouse for these different stackable claims so that we can really, we don't want to double count certainly, but we also really want to be able to stack claims. And there's a function there, I think, that has yet to be addressed legislatively to help clear those claims and provide integrity, but anonymity and trust in that process. But I would like to sort of step back from, the vision that you put forward, which is really sort of the technical vision of, you enter your data once and then you can choose from this assortment of incentives and as well as recommendations and so forth. But I think there's a big piece here that we run up daily, which is with producers, which is that there's still a big digital and cultural divide as we bring all these tools into the field. And I think that there's a real role for creating empathy and a human component to actually bringing these tools into the field and these opportunities to build trust in it. And I think that's about relationship. And it's something that our technical service providers and field staff and conservation districts are in play a really important role as ambassadors for this in moving again this planning process forward. And again, not expecting that every producer or everybody in the food system is a digital native. So part of it is like all this rural broadband and so forth, but there is also this there's a transition here that I think we should be really sensitive to be successful and build trust. And I see the announcement of the Civilian Climate Corps as or the executive order around the study for a Civilian Climate Corps is perhaps leading in that direction, is providing that human face towards engaging in these opportunities.
Great connection, Dorn. I also think that this momentum, I shouldn't say new, burgeoning momentum around soil health data collection, informed decision-making at the policy level and at the on-farm level is a huge rural economic building opportunity, right? To get some more folks out there employed, working to help collect, verify, monitor these data results. And I appreciated the conversation around trust and peer-to-peer conversations, helping to refacilitate those connections between people. So Jeff, did you unmute yourself because we're out of time?
I did.
Darn.
I
Can
know there's so many questions. I don't know how this continues on without, but if you want, but just remember that all questions not answered will be attempted to be answered by us or others that we can answer them for you. And this is
Great.
all available for many days afterwards, so you can review everything more carefully, because there was a lot of stuff going in that chat room at the end.
There was. And I don't know if I can be greedy, Jeff, but if I can steal like
Try.
2 to 3 more minutes and ask for closing thoughts from the panelists,
Yeah,
and we'll go in the reverse order.
Yeah, go ahead. I guess people can do what they want. I don't know how it works technologically, but go ahead.
We're throwing that out there. So let's go backwards. Dorn, let's start with you. Any closing thoughts based on the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're at a moment where an awful lot is possible, and I think that's exciting. But I guess I would focus again on my last comment that so much of this, as much as it's technological, is about community and conversation building and creating the tools to ask the questions together. Because there's a lot of these questions are very difficult to answer individually. And require a way in which we can ask those questions together more easily. So I'll leave it at that.
Great. Bianca.
Yeah, I just really want to echo what Dorn said there. You know, the communication, the conversation with each individual producer across the community locally is really key in terms of getting adoption, in terms of figuring out what the challenges are and how it is that people are addressing them. I think so often we might hear, oh, well, it works over there, but not here. And I think that as we're starting to pull together and compile some of these data at regional and national levels, we'll really start to be able to tackle some of those key things where we can say, yeah, no, it really does work here too, and here's how you would do that at the local level. So I'm really excited that there's so many folks out there who are working on this. I want to thank every single person out there who's working on soil health, because I think that we need every single one of us and more. I anticipate that the momentum will continue to grow, because I think it's where we really have that win-win, where the producer benefits, the public benefits, the environment benefits. It's just such a fantastic opportunity. And I think we're in an age where data collection is much more easy than it used to be. So I think I see great things coming, and I look forward to the continued collaboration. Thanks, everybody.
Aria.
Brilliant. Thank you, Bianca, and thank you, everyone. I would simply add a reminder that in all of this involvement, that all of us being involved in policy is critical. This is an avenue that belongs to all of us and isn't just for a select few, and that soil health really is an issue of common ground. The conversation is wider than just carbon, and that there are really some terrific opportunities in risk mitigation as well. So thank you all.
Great, and I will steal the last 30 seconds and plug that I didn't get a chance to talk about NRDC's work because I really wanted to focus on the 3 panelists that we had the pleasure of joining today. But we are working, NRDC has worked and will continue to work on reforms to the federal crop insurance program to Aria's point, help flip some of the federal incentive programs so that we're rewarding building soil health practices instead of bailing out degrading practices. So we're really looking forward to that. And it sounds like us advocates have our work cut out for us. I have 6 ideas for policy that just came out from this conversation, from helping facilitate peer-to-peer conversations to ag data use agreements to potentially funding for technical assistance to help build some of these, the trust and utilization of tools that are coming out from NRCS. So lots of activity in this space. Bianca, I agree with you. This is a moment to capture. Aria, I very much agree that, you know, I worked in Capitol Hill as a staffer. Those phone calls do count. Those letters that you send to your decision makers are read and are responded to. So the more that people voice their opinions to their elected officials, the more activity and the more we can get done to help build soil health and make sure that policy is informed by the best soil health data collected. Thank you all so much to the panel for joining us today, and everyone else, you all get 10 minutes, hopefully, to you bio breaks, coffee breaks before the next panel conversation. Thank you all very much for joining.